I turned my neighbor's life into a living nightmare, destroyed his reputation with 50 witnesses, and made him flee his own home. All because he cut down my grandmother's cherry tree and laughed about it. The first time Derek Callahan blocked my driveway, I thought it was an accident. I knocked on his door at 7:30 in the morning, still in my scrubs from my overnight shift at the hospital, exhaustion weighing heavy on my shoulders. The house next door had been empty for 6 months before Derek moved in 3 weeks ago, and I'd been foolishly optimistic about having a neighbor again. My grandmother's old house, now mine after her passing last year, sat on the corner of Maple and 3rd, and I'd grown used to the quiet. "Excuse me," I said when Derek opened the door, his hair disheveled and eyes narrow with irritation. "Your truck is blocking my driveway. I can't get out." He looked past me at his massive black pickup, parked diagonally across the bottom of my driveway like he owned the entire street. Then he looked back at me, and I saw something cold flicker across his face. "So?" The word hit me like a slap. "So? I need to get out. I have to be at the hospital in 40 minutes. Derek scratched his bare chest and yawned. "Sounds like your problem, not mine." He started to close the door. I put my hand against it, gentle but firm. "Wait, this has to be a misunderstanding. You can't just block someone's driveway." "Says who?" His smile was ugly, predatory. "This is a public street. I can park wherever I want. But you're literally blocking my exit. Figure it out." The door slammed in my face. I stood there for 30 seconds, staring at the peeling paint on his door, trying to process what had just happened. In my 28 years, I'd never encountered such casual, deliberate cruelty from a neighbor. I'd grown up on Maple Street, knew every family, every quirk, every unspoken rule of courtesy that kept our little community functioning. But Derek Callahan wasn't from here. Derek Callahan didn't care about community. I had to call my supervisor and explain why I'd be late. I had to walk 6 blocks to the bus stop because I couldn't move my car. I had to endure the suspicious looks from my colleagues who knew I was never late, never unreliable, never the type to make excuses. That was just day 1. Day 3, Derek's music started. Bass-heavy rap that made my windows vibrate, starting at midnight and continuing until 3, sometimes 4 in the morning. I worked 12-hour shifts and needed sleep, but Derek's sound system had other plans. I tried the polite approach again, knocked on his door at 2:15 a.m. during one of his concerts, wearing my robe and slippers, my voice carefully calm despite the rage burning in my chest. "Derek, I work early shifts at the hospital. Could you please turn the music down?" He was drunk this time, swaying slightly as he gripped the doorframe. Behind him, I could see his living room. Pizza boxes stacked on every surface, beer cans scattered across the floor, the massive speakers that were destroying my sleep positioned directly against our shared wall. "You know what, nurse lady?" His words slurred together. "I work construction, 10 hours a day in the sun, breaking my back so people like you can live in your nice little houses. When I get home, I'm going to relax however I want. I understand that, but nothing." He leaned closer, and I caught the full force of his beer breath. "You got a problem with my music. Call the cops. See how much they care." I did call the cops. Officer Martinez came out at 3:47 a.m., took notes, talked to Derek for 10 minutes. The music stopped for exactly 1 night. Then it came back louder than before, with a new addition. Derek had moved one of his speakers to his backyard, pointing directly at my bedroom window. The parking situation escalated too. Derek's truck wasn't the only vehicle anymore. His friends started showing up, loud, drunk men in equally massive trucks who treated my driveway like their personal parking lot. 3, sometimes 4 vehicles blocking my access, their owners inside Derek's house drinking and laughing while I stood in my yard, trapped. But the tree was what broke me. Grandmother's cherry tree had stood in my front yard for 43 years. She'd planted it the year my mother was born, nurtured it through droughts and storms, celebrated every spring when its pink blossoms turned our corner into something magical. It was the reason she'd bought this house, she always said, the perfect spot for a cherry tree. I came home from a double shift on a Tuesday evening in early March to find Derek in my yard with a chainsaw. Half the tree was already gone. Massive limbs lay scattered across my lawn. pink blossoms crushed into the mud, the sweet scent of sap and destruction thick in the air. Derek stood beside the trunk, chainsaw idling, wearing safety goggles and a grin that made my blood freeze. "What are you doing?" I screamed, running across the yard. "Stop! You can't cut down my tree!" "Branches were hanging over my property line," Derek called back over the chainsaw's roar. "I got the right to trim anything that crosses onto my land." "You're not trimming, you're destroying it!" "Oops," his shrug was theatrical, mocking. "Guess I got a little carried away." I watched him kill the rest of my grandmother's tree, watched 43 years of growth and beauty reduced to scattered wood and broken blossoms. Watched him drag the largest pieces onto his own yard and stack them like trophies. When the chainsaw finally went silent, I found my voice. "You didn't have to kill the whole tree. The branches you're talking about were barely 6 inches over the property line." Derek pulled off his safety goggles and looked at me with genuine amusement. "You know what your problem is, Mia? You think the world owes you something. Nice house, quiet neighborhood, pretty little tree. You think you deserve all that just because you were here first. My name is Mia Chen, and I'd never told him that. He'd been asking about me, learning about me, planning this. But here's the thing," Derek continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. "I don't owe you shit. Not respect, not consideration, not even basic human decency. This is my house now, my neighborhood now, and if you don't like how I do things, you can move." He left me standing in the ruins of my grandmother's tree, surrounded by the sweet smell of destruction, and I realized that Derek Callahan hadn't just moved into my neighborhood, he'd declared war on it. That night, I sat on my back porch with a glass of wine and my grandmother's old photo albums, looking at pictures of the cherry tree through the decades. My mother as a toddler, reaching for the lowest blossoms. High school graduation photos with pink petals scattered across my cap and gown. Grandmother's last Christmas, weak from chemo but insisting we take a picture by her tree, its bare branches stark against the winter sky. "I promise you'll bloom again next spring," she'd whispered to the tree that day, her voice barely audible. It was one of the last things she'd said before the cancer took her voice entirely. Now the tree was gone. Not just damaged, not just wounded, but completely destroyed by a man who thought cruelty was funny. I opened my laptop and started researching Derek Callahan. What I found made my blood run cold. Derek had a history, complaints from previous neighbors in 3 different cities. Noise violations, property destruction, harassment. Always the same pattern. Move in, terrorize the neighborhood, force people to sell their homes for less than they were worth, then flip the properties for profit. But this time was different. This time, Derek Callahan had picked the wrong neighbor. Because Mia Chen wasn't just any nurse. I was a trauma nurse who'd spent 5 years working nights in the emergency room, dealing with the worst humanity had to offer. I'd seen what desperation could drive people to do, how far they'd go when pushed to their absolute limit. And Derek Callahan was about to find out exactly how far I could be pushed. I finished my wine, closed the photo album, and started making a list. Not just of Derek's violations, though there were plenty of those. Not just of the laws he'd broken or the ordinances he'd ignored. I started making a list of everyone who mattered in our neighborhood. Every homeowner, every longtime resident, every person who had as much to lose as I did if Derek's reign of terror continued. Because Derek had made one crucial mistake in his psychological warfare. He'd assumed I was alone. The next morning brought a revelation that changed everything. I was dragging the larger pieces of my grandmother's tree to the curb for pickup when Mrs. Rodriguez from across the street approached with a casserole dish and an expression of barely contained fury. "Mia, honey, I'm so sorry about your tree." Elena Rodriguez had lived on Maple Street for 36 years, raised 4 children in her blue colonial, and served as the unofficial neighborhood watch coordinator. "That man is a monster." "Thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez. Grandmother loved that tree." "I know she did. We all did." Elena's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "But there's something you need to know about your neighbor. Something that changes everything." She glanced around, making sure we weren't being watched, then continued. "Yesterday, while you were at work, Derek came to my door. He offered to buy my house for $40,000 over market value, cash, immediate closing. Said he was cleaning up the neighborhood and wanted to make me an offer I couldn't refuse. My hands went still on the broken branch I was carrying. What did you tell him? I told him to go to hell, obviously. But Mia, he wasn't surprised by my answer. He was expecting it. He smiled and said, "Don't worry, Mrs. Rodriguez. By Christmas, you'll be begging me to take this dump off your hands." The pieces clicked together in my mind like a puzzle I should have solved weeks ago. Derek's escalating harassment wasn't random cruelty. It was a business model. Terrorize the neighborhood, drive down property values, force people to sell, then flip the houses for massive profits. He's not just a bad neighbor, I said slowly. He's running a scam. Elena nodded grimly. And from what I've heard, he's done this before. 3 times in the last 5 years, different cities. Always the same pattern. Move into a nice, quiet neighborhood, make life hell for everyone around him, then start making offers on houses that people suddenly can't wait to sell. But why our street? Why Maple Street? Location, honey. We're 6 blocks from the new medical complex, walking distance to downtown, surrounded by parks. These houses are worth double what most of us paid for them, but Derek thinks he can scare us into selling for half their current value. I felt something cold and calculating settle in my chest. Derek Callahan wasn't just destroying my peace of mind. He was trying to steal my future. Grandmother's house was my only real asset, my security, my retirement plan. If Derek succeeded in turning Maple Street into a war zone, I'd lose everything. Who else has he approached? I asked. The Hendersons next to me? The young couple in the yellow house on the corner. Old Mr. Park, who lives alone. Derek's been especially cruel to him, playing music all night, knowing Henry has to get up at 5 for his dialysis treatments. Each name was another punch to the gut. These weren't just my neighbors. They were my community. People who'd brought me soup when I had the flu, who'd helped me clear out grandmother's belongings after the funeral, who'd made Maple Street feel like home even after I'd lost the last of my family. What are we going to do? Elena asked. I looked at the ruins of my grandmother's tree, then at Derek's house with its multiple trucks blocking the street, then at Elena's worried face. We're going to destroy him, I said quietly. Elena's eyes widened. Mia? Not physically, not illegally, but Derek Callahan picked the wrong neighborhood to terrorize, and I'm going to make sure he regrets every second of it. That afternoon, I called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years and started making phone calls. First, I called the county clerk's office and requested every document related to Derek's property purchase. What I found was fascinating. Derek had bought his house through a shell company registered in Delaware, paying cash, closing in just 10 days. The kind of transaction that screamed money laundering or tax evasion. Next, I called my friend Jessica, who worked in the city planning department. What she told me made my heart race with possibility. Mia, your street is scheduled for major infrastructure improvements next year. New water lines, upgraded electrical, repaved roads. The city's been planning it for 3 years, and property values are expected to jump 30% once the work is complete. Is this public information? It will be in 6 months when they announce the project. Right now, it's only known to city employees and the contractors who will be doing the work. Derek had insider information. Someone had told him about the infrastructure improvements, and he was using that knowledge to target our neighborhood before property values skyrocketed. Jessica, I need you to pull the permits for Derek Callahan's house. I want to know every renovation, every improvement, every piece of paperwork filed since he moved in. What Jessica found was a gold mine of violations. Derek had been renovating his house without proper permits, installing electrical work without licensed contractors, adding plumbing that violated city codes. Any one of these violations could result in massive fines and forced repairs. But I wasn't done digging. I drove to Derek's previous addresses, the 3 cities where he'd run his neighborhood terrorism scheme before. I talked to former neighbors, real estate agents, city officials. The pattern was always the same. Move in, cause chaos, buy up distressed properties, then disappear with massive profits. In his last city, Derek had made over $400,000 in 18 months. In the city before that, nearly $500,000. He was a professional predator, and Maple Street was his next hunting ground. But Derek had made two crucial mistakes. First, he'd underestimated me. He saw a quiet nurse living alone in her grandmother's house and assumed I'd be easy to intimidate. Second, he'd underestimated our neighborhood. Maple Street wasn't just a collection of individual houses. It was a community. And communities could fight back in ways that individuals never could. That evening, I started making visits. I went to Elena Rodriguez first, spreading Derek's permit violations and code enforcement documents across her kitchen table like battle plans. He's operating a construction business out of his house without proper licensing, I explained. Commercial vehicles parked in a residential zone, unlicensed contractors coming and going at all hours, building materials stored in violation of fire codes. Elena studied the papers with the attention of someone who'd spent 40 years as a high school principal. What do you need me to do? Help me organize the neighbors. I want to file complaints with every relevant city department simultaneously. Code enforcement, fire department, zoning board, noise control, the homeowners association. I want Derek drowning in bureaucratic hell while we plan something bigger. Next, I visited Henry Park. At 78, Henry was our street's senior resident and had connections throughout the city from his decades as a civil engineer. That son of a bitch has been targeting me specifically, Henry said, his usually gentle voice shaking with anger. Parking his truck so I can't get my car out for dialysis appointments. Playing music loudest right outside my bedroom window. Yesterday, one of his drunk friends pissed on my roses. I'm gonna stop him, Mr. Park, but I need your help. Henry's eyes sharpened with interest. What did you have in mind? I told him about Derek's business model, the infrastructure improvements, the pattern of neighborhood terrorism. Henry listened without interruption, his engineer's mind processing every detail. You know what we need? Henry said finally. We need to turn his own game against him. Derek thinks he can use chaos and disruption to control us, but chaos works both ways. The plan began to take shape over the next 3 days. Elena would coordinate with the Homeowners Association and gather documentation of every violation, every complaint, every instance of harassment. Henry would use his city connections to fast-track the code enforcement complaints and ensure Derek faced maximum penalties. And I would handle the psychological warfare. Because Derek Callahan was about to learn that trauma nurses don't break under pressure. We thrive on it. On Thursday evening, Derek's latest party was in full swing. Loud music, drunk men stumbling around his yard, trucks blocking the street as usual. But this time, instead of calling the police, I did something different. I sat on my front porch with a notepad and started taking notes. License plate numbers, faces, times, noise levels measured on a decibel app. I took photos of the blocked driveways, videos of the public urination, recordings of the obscene language being shouted at 3 a.m. Derek noticed me after about an hour. He stumbled across the yard, beer in hand, flanked by 2 of his construction worker friends. "What the hell are you doing?" he slurred. "Documenting," I said calmly, not looking up from my notepad, "for my complaint to the city council next week." Derek laughed, but it sounded forced. "You think anyone gives a shit about your complaints?" "We'll find out." I finally looked up, meeting his eyes with the steady gaze I'd perfected during 5 years of dealing with violent drunks in the emergency room. "By the way, Derek, I did some research on your previous addresses. Interesting pattern you've got going." Something shifted in Derek's expression. The drunken swagger faltered for just a moment. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. Milwaukee, Phoenix, Tulsa, same scam every time. Terror tactics, property manipulation, quick profits." I turned the page in my notepad and continued writing. "The only question is whether you're doing this alone or if someone's feeding you insider information about city development projects." Derek's face went pale in the porch light. His friends looked confused, but Derek understood exactly what I was implying. "You don't know shit," he said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "Maybe not, but I'm a very fast learner and I have a lot of free time to research." I smiled at him, the same polite smile I'd used during our first encounter. "Oh, and Derek, that shell company you used to buy your house? Delaware filing requirements are very specific about disclosure. Just thought you should know." Derek stared at me for a long moment, his beer forgotten in his hand. Then he turned and walked back to his house without another word. The party ended an hour later. But the war was just beginning. The first wave hit Derek on a Monday morning. I was leaving for my hospital shift when I saw the city trucks pulling up to his house, code enforcement, fire department, zoning inspector, and a tow truck for the commercial vehicles illegally parked in a residential zone. Derek came stumbling out of his house in boxer shorts and a stained t-shirt, his hair wild from sleep, to find 6 city officials with clipboards and citation books. "What the hell is this?" he shouted. "Mr. Callahan?" The lead inspector was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with steel gray hair. "We've received multiple complaints about unpermitted construction, code violations, and zoning infractions at this address." I didn't stop to watch the full show, but Elena called me at work 2 hours later with a complete report. 64 violations, she said, barely able to contain her glee. 64 separate code violations, including some that require immediate cessation of all construction activity. How much in fines? $47,000. And that's just the first round. Derek's trucks were gone by the time I got home that evening, towed to the city impound lot. His construction materials sat under yellow caution tape. Most importantly, his house was silent for the first time in weeks. But I was just getting started. Phase 2 began on Wednesday, and it required help from my colleagues at the hospital. Dr. Sarah Kim had been my supervisor for 3 years and lived 2 neighborhoods over from Maple Street. When I explained Derek's business model and his targeting of elderly neighbors like Henry Park, her Korean-American sensibilities kicked into overdrive. This man is deliberately interfering with an elderly patient's medical treatment? Sarah's voice was ice cold. That's not just harassment, Mia. That's reckless endangerment. I was hoping you might know people who could help document the health impacts. Sarah's smile was predatory. Honey, I know everyone in the county health department, and elder abuse is a very serious matter in this city. By Friday, Derek had received visits from Adult Protective Services, investigating the harassment of an elderly neighbor, the Environmental Health Department, noise pollution affecting the sleep patterns of multiple residents, and a very serious woman from the district attorney's office who specialized in financial crimes. The DA investigator was my personal favorite, arranged through my friend Marcus, who worked in the prosecutor's office. Someone filed a complaint about potential mortgage fraud and money laundering, Marcus explained over coffee. Apparently, there's a pattern of property manipulation using shell companies and insider information, the kind of thing the DA loves to prosecute right before election season. Derek's silent house became a fortress of anxiety. I could see him peeking through his curtains whenever cars drove down our street, jumping at every knock on his door. But the real masterpiece was still to come. Phase 3 required the full cooperation of the neighborhood, and by this point, everyone on Maple Street was ready for war. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced at the emergency neighborhood meeting Elena had organized for the following Saturday, I present to you the Derek Callahan welcome party. 23 neighbors crowded into Elena's living room, representing every household on our street. The young couple from the yellow house, the Henderson family, old Henry Park with his oxygen tank, the retired teacher from the blue colonial, even the teenagers from the corner house who'd been Derek's noise violations victims. Derek thinks he can use disruption and chaos to drive us away, I continued. So I propose we give him exactly what he's been giving us. I spread a large map of the neighborhood across Elena's coffee table, marked with colored dots representing each property. Here's the beautiful thing about Derek's business model. It only works if he controls the chaos. If he's the one causing the disruption, while everyone else suffers in silence. But what happens when the chaos gets flipped back on him? Henry Park leaned forward, his eyes bright with interest. What did you have in mind? A block party, I said simply. A big, loud community celebration, right in the middle of the street, directly in front of Derek's house. Is that legal? Asked Jennifer Henderson. Absolutely. We file for a street closure permit, cite community building, and neighborhood unity as our purposes. The city loves that kind of thing. We'll have music, food, games for the kids, the whole works. And Derek? Derek won't be invited. In fact, Derek will be specifically excluded from the one thing happening on his own street. He'll be trapped in his house, watching the entire neighborhood party without him, knowing that every single person out there is celebrating his misery. The room erupted in excited chatter. Someone mentioned bringing a bounce house. Another neighbor offered to rent a professional sound system. The teenagers volunteered to DJ. But that's not the best part, I continued, waiting for silence. The block party is just the opening act. While Derek is focused on the festivities, we'll be serving him with every legal notice we've been saving up. I opened my briefcase and spread documents across the table like a deck of cards. Homeowners Association violations, noise ordinance citations, property line dispute notifications, environmental health complaints, and my personal favorite, a civil lawsuit for the destruction of my grandmother's tree, filed on behalf of the entire neighborhood for loss of property values due to his deliberate harassment campaign. Elena picked up one of the legal documents, her principal's training making her read every word carefully. "This is brilliant, Mia, but are you sure it's enough to get rid of him?" "Elena, Derek Callahan is a businessman. His whole operation depends on speed and efficiency. Move in, 'cause chaos, buy properties cheap, get out fast." But now he's facing months of legal battles, thousands of dollars in fines, and a neighborhood that's actively fighting back instead of running away. "What if he escalates?" Henry asked. "What if he gets violent?" I thought about this for a moment, remembering Derek's face when he'd realized I knew about his previous schemes. He won't. Derek is a coward who preys on people he thinks are weak and isolated. But we're not weak, and we're definitely not isolated. We're a community, and communities have power that individuals don't. The vote was unanimous. Operation Block Party was scheduled for the following Saturday. I spent the week making final preparations, and pulling every string I'd developed during 5 years of working in a major hospital. Medical supply companies donated tables and chairs. The hospital's employee union provided a professional catering setup. My friend from the fire department arranged for a safety inspection that would ensure our sound permits were absolutely bulletproof. Derek tried to interfere, of course. He called the city to complain about our permit application, filed counter-complaints about noise and public disturbance, even hired a lawyer to send threatening letters about the harassment lawsuit. But Derek had made a crucial error in his legal strategy. His lawyer was a strip mall attorney who specialized in real estate transactions, not criminal defense or civil litigation. Meanwhile, I had retained Jennifer Wu, a former prosecutor who'd left the DA's office to start her own practice and had a reputation for destroying bullies in court. "Miss Chen," Jennifer said during our consultation, "I've reviewed Mr. Callahan's legal filings, and I'm actually impressed. He's managed to incriminate himself in at least 6 different ways while trying to defend against your original complaint." "How so?" "Well, first, he's admitted to cutting down your tree without permission, which is destruction of property. Second, he's documented his own pattern of harassment through his counter-complaints. Third, his lawyer accidentally disclosed information about his shell company arrangements that supports the money laundering investigation. And fourth," Jennifer's smile was sharp as a blade. "Fourth, he's tried to intimidate a witness in a federal investigation. The DA is not happy about that." Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for a block party. I was setting up tables in the street by 7 a.m., running on pure adrenaline and the kind of focused energy I usually reserved for trauma surgeries. By 10 a.m., Maple Street was transformed. Colorful banners stretched between the trees, food trucks lined both sides of the road, children ran laughing through the crowds while parents chatted over beer and barbecue. The professional sound system pumped out classic rock and contemporary hits at exactly the maximum volume allowed under city ordinance. Derek's house sat in the middle of it all, like a dark island in a sea of celebration. I could see him through his windows, pacing back and forth, occasionally peering through the blinds at the crowd outside. His phone rang constantly. I assumed it was complaints to the police, the city, anyone who might shut down our party. But we'd done everything by the book. Every permit filed, every regulation followed, every safety precaution taken. Derek had no legal recourse to stop us. At noon, the process servers arrived. I'd coordinated with Jennifer Wu to have Derek served with every outstanding legal notice simultaneously, timed to coincide with the peak of our block party festivities. The servers walked through the celebrating crowd like sharks through a school of fish, professional and unstoppable. Derek saw them coming and tried to pretend he wasn't home. But our street party had attracted attention from the local news, a feel-good story about community unity. And the TV cameras caught everything. The servers knocked. Derek ignored them. The servers knocked louder, announcing their presence as required by law. Derek still hid. Finally, one of the servers used the perfectly legal technique of posting the legal documents on Derek's front door, announcing in a voice that carried clearly over our party music. Service of legal documents for Derek Callahan regarding violation of city codes, destruction of property, harassment of neighbors, and financial fraud investigation. The crowd went quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then someone started clapping. Within moments, the entire block party was applauding the process servers like they were rock stars. Derek's front door flew open. "You think this is funny?" he screamed at the crowd, his face red with rage and humiliation. "You think you can fuck with me like this?" The news cameras captured every word. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," Derek continued, storming into the middle of our celebration. "I'll destroy every one of you. I'll make your lives hell. Mr. Callahan," a calm voice interrupted. "You're under arrest." Detective Rivera of the White Collar Crime Unit had been waiting for exactly this moment. Derek's public threats, captured on live television, were the final piece needed for the intimidation and witness tampering charges. As the detective cuffed Derek in the middle of our block party, with news cameras rolling and 50 neighbors watching, I felt something profound shift in the air. This wasn't just justice. This was transformation. The monster who'd terrorized our street for months was being led away in handcuffs while our community celebrated around the space he'd tried to control. But even as the police car drove away, I knew this was only the beginning, because Derek Callahan was about to learn that destroying someone's home has consequences he never imagined. Derek posted bail on Monday morning, but the man who returned to Maple Street was a shadow of the predator who'd terrorized us for months. I watched from my kitchen window as he pulled into his driveway in a taxi. His truck still impounded, his construction business shut down by the city, his life in free fall. He moved like someone who'd aged 10 years in 3 days, shoulders hunched, constantly looking over his shoulder. The neighborhood had changed too. Our block party hadn't just been a celebration, it had been a declaration. We were no longer individual homeowners hiding behind closed doors. We were a united community that wouldn't be intimidated. Derek seemed to sense this shift immediately. Where once he'd strutted across his yard like he owned the street, now he scurried from his car to his house like prey avoiding predators. But I wasn't done with Derek Callahan yet. Tuesday brought the first wave of media attention. Our block party had been featured on 3 local news stations as a heartwarming story about neighborhood unity. But the arrest footage was what made it go viral. Within 48 hours, Derek's public meltdown had been viewed over 2 million times on social media. Entitled "Neighbor Gets Arrested at Block Party He Wasn't Invited To" read the headline on the viral TikTok video. The comments were savage. Thousands of people sharing their own stories about nightmare neighbors, applauding our community response, and calling Derek everything from a pathetic bully to a real estate terrorist. But the real damage was happening behind the scenes. Wednesday morning, I received a call that changed everything. "Miss Chen? This is Agent Sarah Martinez with the FBI's Financial Crimes Task Force. We'd like to discuss Derek Callahan's business operations." The federal investigation had been triggered by Derek's pattern of property manipulation, but what they'd uncovered was far more extensive than I'd imagined. Derek wasn't just running a neighborhood terrorism scheme. He was part of a larger network of real estate fraudsters operating across 7 states. Mr. Callahan has been using insider information from corrupt city officials to target neighborhoods scheduled for infrastructure improvements. Agent Martinez explained during our meeting at the FBI field office. "We believe he's made over $3 million in illegal profits over the past 5 years. 3 million? That's just what we can document so far. The investigation is ongoing, but we have enough evidence to file federal charges for conspiracy, money laundering, and racketeering. Derek's house of cards was collapsing faster than anyone could have predicted. Thursday, the city council voted unanimously to fast-track the infrastructure improvements for Maple Street. The project that had been scheduled for next year would now begin in 3 months, a direct response to our community's public stand against Derek's tactics. Sometimes it takes a crisis to show us who we really are, Councilwoman Patricia Singh said during the meeting. The residents of Maple Street have shown us what community unity looks like, and the city is proud to support neighborhoods that support each other. Property values on our street jumped 15% overnight. Friday brought the eviction notice. Derek's mortgage had been called in by his bank after news of the federal investigation broke. His construction business accounts had been frozen as part of the money laundering probe. His lawyer had dropped him after Derek missed 2 payment deadlines. I watched from my porch as Derek loaded his few remaining possessions into a rented truck. No friends came to help him move. No construction workers showed up to assist. The man who'd surrounded himself with a crew of intimidating followers was leaving exactly as he'd arrived, alone. He caught me watching and walked across the yard one final time. "You happy now?" Derek's voice was hollow, defeated. "You destroyed my life." I looked at him for a long moment. This man who'd terrorized my neighborhood, cut down my grandmother's tree, and tried to steal my future. No, Derek, you destroyed your own life. I just made sure you faced the consequences. You think you're so smart, so righteous, but you have no idea what you've cost me. I know exactly what I've cost you. The same thing you tried to cost us. Everything. Derek stared at me, searching for some trace of the quiet, intimidated nurse he'd thought he could easily break. Instead, he found someone who'd discovered her own strength. The difference between us, I continued, is that when you tried to destroy our community, we fought back together. When the world tried to destroy you, you were completely alone. Derek had no response to that. He turned and walked back to his truck without another word. As he drove away from Maple Street for the last time, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not just victory, transformation. The woman who'd knocked on Derek's door 6 months ago, politely asking him to move his truck, was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that sometimes the only way to deal with a predator is to become more dangerous than they are. But the real transformation wasn't just personal. Saturday morning, Elena Rodriguez knocked on my door with coffee and pastries from the new bakery downtown. "I wanted to thank you," she said as we sat on my porch, looking out at the peaceful street where children played and neighbors chatted over garden fences. Not just for getting rid of Derek, but for showing us who we could be. What do you mean? Before this whole mess started, we were just people who happened to live near each other. But now we're actually neighbors. Real neighbors who look out for each other. She was right. In the weeks since Derek's departure, Maple Street had become something special. The Hendersons had organized a tool-sharing program so everyone could borrow equipment instead of buying it. Henry Park had started a morning walking group that doubled as neighborhood watch. The teenagers from the corner house had volunteered to help elderly residents with yard work. Most remarkably, 3 new families had moved onto our street in the past month, drawn by news reports about our strong community bonds. Property values had increased another 10%. You know what the funny thing is? Elena continued. Derek thought he could use fear and chaos to control us, but all he really did was show us how powerful we could be when we worked together. That afternoon, I received a call from Jennifer Wu with news about Derek's legal situation. The federal case is moving forward rapidly, she reported. Derek has agreed to cooperate with the FBI investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's giving up his entire network, corrupt city officials, other real estate fraudsters, even the shell companies that were financing the operation. How long will he serve? Probably 4 to 6 years, plus restitution to all his victims. And Mia? The restitution includes compensation for your grandmother's tree. The court valued it at $12,000 based on its age and the property value impact. $12,000 wouldn't bring back 43 years of growth and beauty, but it was enough to replant the entire front yard and establish a small scholarship fund in my grandmother's memory. That evening, I stood in my front yard with a shovel and a young cherry tree sapling, preparing to plant new life where Derek had brought destruction. Henry Park appeared with his own shovel. Then Alina with gardening gloves. Within an hour, half the neighborhood had gathered to help plant my grandmother's replacement tree. As we worked together in the golden light of sunset, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. 6 months ago, I'd been a quiet trauma nurse living alone in her grandmother's house, trying to avoid conflict and hoping problems would solve themselves. Now, I was someone who understood that sometimes the greatest kindness is refusing to let cruelty go unchallenged. "You know," Henry said as we packed soil around the new tree's roots, "your grandmother would be proud of what you did." "How can you be sure?" "Because she raised your mother to stand up for what's right, and your mother raised you the same way." Derek thought that tree was just wood and leaves, but it was really a symbol of everything your family had built on this street. When he cut it down, he was attacking generations of love and community. I looked at the young sapling, its delicate branches reaching toward the sky like hope made visible. "But now we've planted something new," I said. "Something that will grow stronger because of what we went through together." As the weeks passed, I began to understand the true scope of what we'd accomplished. Derek's arrest had triggered a city-wide crackdown on real estate fraud. 7 other predators were arrested, dozens of victims received restitution, and the city implemented new protections for neighborhoods targeted by harassment campaigns. Our story became a model for other communities facing similar threats. I received emails from people across the country asking for advice on organizing neighborhood responses to property predators. The most satisfying message came from Derek's previous victims in Milwaukee. "We saw your story on the news," wrote Patricia Coleman, a retired teacher whose neighborhood had been terrorized by Derek 2 years earlier. "We thought we were alone and powerless, but your example showed us we could fight back. We've filed a class action lawsuit and demanded a federal investigation. Derek Callahan is finally going to pay for what he did to our community, too." 3 months after Derek's departure, I was promoted to charge nurse in the emergency department. My supervisor, Dr. Kim, said my leadership during the neighborhood crisis had demonstrated skills the hospital needed. "You showed incredible strategic thinking, community organizing ability, and grace under pressure," she explained. "Those are exactly the qualities we need in our management team." But the greatest victory was more personal. On a warm evening in late summer, I was watering my grandmother's new tree when I noticed something that made my heart skip. Tiny pink buds were forming on the young branches. Cherry trees typically don't bloom in their first year, but this one was different. Fed by good soil, tended by loving hands, surrounded by a community that had fought to protect it, the tree was preparing to flower ahead of schedule. I called Elena and Henry, and within minutes, half the neighborhood had gathered to witness the miracle of early blossoms on our victory tree. As we stood together in the fading light, watching pink petals unfold like promises of spring, I realized that Derek Callahan had given us something he never intended. He'd tried to break our community, but instead, he'd shown us how strong we really were. He'd tried to steal our peace, but instead, he'd taught us that some things are worth fighting for. He'd tried to destroy our home, but instead, he'd helped us build something better than what we'd had before. 6 months earlier, I'd been a victim, quiet, isolated, hoping someone else would solve my problems. Now I was a survivor who'd learned that the best defense against predators isn't hiding. It's refusing to let them hunt alone. Derek Callahan thought he could terrorize Maple Street into submission, but he'd made one fatal miscalculation. He'd assumed that good people would always choose peace over justice, that communities would always choose silence over resistance, that victims would always choose hiding over fighting. But sometimes, when you push good people too far, you don't get compliance. You get consequences. And Derek Callahan had just learned that some consequences last a lifetime. As I locked my front door that night and turned off the porch light, I looked once more at the young cherry tree standing proudly in my yard, its early blossoms glowing like stars in the darkness. Tomorrow it would grow a little taller, a little stronger, a little more beautiful. Just like the community that had planted it, just like the woman who'd learned to fight back. And in the spring, when the tree bloomed in full glory, every pink petal would be a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful flowers grow from the deepest wounds. Derek Callahan had tried to cut down our roots. Instead, he'd taught us how to grow.